On your Tuesday episode of Locked On Raptors, with just 16 days to go before the deadline, can you hear that? It's Trade Whispers.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, January the 21st. And I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 11 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on Blue Sky. You can also find the show on Instagram. And you can also join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server, where if you get me on the right moment, you might see me waste an hour of my life debating a silly thing in one of our many channels. It's just one of the bonuses of being there in the Discord. So please come hang out and let's all be unproductive together, shall we? Of course, you can go and support the show by following, subscribing, rating, reviewing, all that good stuff. You can also join the newsletter crew. You can go to the QR code on the screen, and if you're watching on YouTube, that is, you can click through and subscribe to the daily Locked On Raptors newsletter. You can also go to the link in the description of the podcast if you're not watching, and you can sign up there. Every single day, 5 days a week, you get me, original writing, in your inbox for the low, low price of On the House. You get Katie Heindel with her big takes in the league as well. You got Michael Shearer from Basketball Poetry on Thursdays. You got Josh Lloyd Fantasy Tips. No reason to not go subscribe to the daily Locked On Raptors newsletter if you haven't yet. All right, today's show brought to you by friends at Prize Picks. Now is the perfect time to join. Down the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. No need to win to get the bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. And we will pick up the podcast here, get rolling on a Tuesday where we're talking about trade scuttlebutt, baby. Yes, it's that season. We're just over 2 weeks out from the NBA trade deadline, and the Raptors, while not necessarily having the sexiest collection of players to go and offer as sellers at this deadline, do figure to be somewhat involved. Because it's not a super robust trade market, so a couple other guys might have some value around the league, and B, because it seems as though the Raptors might be in the mix as a team that wants to grease the wheels, as it were, of larger trades with bigger salaries, as is kind of the case, or kind of the necessity in the modern NBA, where we're under the apron system and making trades is extremely hard, especially for the good teams that are also very expensive. And so we're going to dig into Chris Boucher and his situation. Jake Fischer from the Steinline newsletter at Substack reporting yesterday that there's some interest in him from a couple teams, but also there is some interest perhaps in a mutual decision to stick around in Toronto. We'll get into that. We'll talk about Bruce Brown and why you just got to stop worrying about what the hell the return is going to be there, because it doesn't really matter. But let's just kind of run through some of the stuff that we got from Jake Fischer, that is, yesterday in his report over at the Steinline newsletter, which is a great thing to subscribe to because Jake Fischer and Mark Stein, two of the best when it comes to purveying slop, as it were. So Jake Fischer yesterday reported that the Raptors are kind of in the mix and are interested and in a good position to be one of the teams that can go and kind of facilitate deals around the deadline. We've seen this with a few teams already. We saw it with the Hornets in the summertime with the Knicks and Wolves trade, and just kind of sliding in there to get a guy and a couple picks just to sort of take on salary and be just sort of a middle agent, I suppose, to make all of the salary math work, which is difficult to make happen in the apron system that we currently operate under. The Detroit Pistons have been thrown around as a team as like one of the only teams, maybe the only team right now that actually has cap space to work with to go and absorb players into. The Raptors are also positioned pretty well, and as Jake Fischer noted, maybe positioned better than most teams to be one of these sort of agents to get these deals done, because they have some money under the luxury tax and under the first apron. They're 10 plus million under the tax right now, 11.2 million under the first apron per Jake Fischer. We heard Doug Smith report over the weekend that the Raptors might be into the idea of kind of being the third team to facilitate a Jimmy Butler trade. That doesn't mean they'd be getting Jimmy Butler. That would make absolutely no sense for where the Raptors are at right now. But as a team that can sort of step in, take on some extra salary, send out some expiring money to teams in exchange to sort of help a Jimmy Butler trade along, and you get a couple assets along the way, a couple second-round picks. Who the hell knows? Maybe a young player. Who's to say? The Raptors are in a decent spot to be able to do that because they have a lot of guys on expiring contracts that might be interesting to teams, in particular, say the Miami Heat, who are about to maybe move on from Jimmy Butler and are, maybe looking to reset things in the summer, and having expiring deals in this cap climate is actually kind of a beneficial thing. Just to kind of refresh where the Raptors are at in terms of guys who could be had. Bruce Brown, obviously the big one, an expiring $23 million salary. You've got Chris Boucher making $10.8 million, also expiring. Davion Mitchell makes 6.4, maybe a less attractive guy as a piece for a playoff run for some teams. But as Jake Fischer noted, the idea of having like a little extra defense on your bench is not the worst thing in the world. And then Kelly Olynyk came up as well as a potential target for other teams. He, of course, has one more year beyond this at about $13 million. And so, a team would be taking him on for more than just the end of this season. Had you told me this 2 weeks ago, I would have said, why would a team be doing that? But Olynyk's looked a little bit better the last couple of weeks, looks a little bit more like he's shaken off the back trouble that obviously kept him out for the big chunk at the start of the season and kind of kept him looking, let's say, old and creaky for the first little bit he was actually playing games. And so maybe there's a growing market for Olynyk now that he's looking a little bit more like himself, albeit with some serious limitations. And so you have all of that to kind of consider here. And I think just in general, this is how the Raptors should be operating right now. Like, it's time for the Raptors to be pretty normal, right? And when you're bad, you just got to kind of accept your lot in life. Do I wish they were not in this position? Do I wish they were better than 10-32? Absolutely. Do I think tanking is maybe not like my favorite thing in the world? 100%. I'm generally pretty anti-tank in general, but when the team is doing it, what are you to do but just accept, roll with it, and try to sort of do the things that you're supposed to do when you're at this juncture as a franchise? And for the Raptors, I think it's a great idea to be using the flexibility they have with all these expiring contracts to try to go and make something happen, to get a couple extra assets in the door, whether it's second round picks, whether it's young, interesting players they might be able to take a shot on. We'll talk about a couple of those guys coming up a little bit later on in the show for sure. I think this is like what teams in the Raptors position do. And that doesn't preclude them necessarily from doing sort of quote unquote Raptors ass moves at the deadline either. I do think there's something interesting to the idea of the Raptors looking again at a similar type of move to what they did with Ochai Agbaji last year, right? Where they trade that 29th overall pick and they get back Olynyk and they get back Ochai Agbaji. And, it turned into the Ochai Agbaji trade more than the Olynyk trade for sure. I think Olynyk has his value, and we'll see if they turn him into something or if he just plays nice basketball for them down the stretch and into next year. Who's to say? But Ochai Agbaji, I think that's like kind of a clear win for what the Raptors kind of envisioned there, where it's like we had this pick. It's the 29th pick, probably. It's the Thunder's pick. It's not a great pick. This is probably not going to yield us a lot in the draft or like a really kind of bankable prospect. Let's trade it for a guy with a little bit more of an established track record, a bit of a more sort of fully fleshed out sample of what he is and is not as a player. And let's see if we can put some developmental magic to work. And it seems as though they've turned Ochai Agbaji from a guy who looked like he was on the fringes of the league into a dyed-in-the-wool, very nice top 7 or 8 rotation player. That's a win. And I think if they can try to go hit a single like that by maybe dangling that Blazers pick, or if they get some other picks back in exchange for Boucher or Bruce Brown or Olynyk or Davion Mitchell, or just taking on money to sort of facilitate a bigger deal, maybe that's a thing they can do where they look at, a second round pick that's going to be pretty decent from the Blazers, for example, and they try to go find a similar guy in the vein of Ochai Agbaji, who may be sort of a second draft guy. I wouldn't be upset if that was sort of the outcome for this deadline either. But overall, I think just kind of being a normal team and accepting their lot in life and understanding that they're bad. The draft this summer is going to dictate a whole lot about what comes next for them. And in the meantime, you can kind of make some little subtle moves on the side and just, again, hit singles. You just got to hit singles at this point. That is like, you don't need to go swing for the fences and do crazy things. You just got to do small incremental things. A thing that the Raptors used to be really good at that they kind of fell off the last few years, kind of got back to it this last year, I think, in particular with the draft day trade or the second day of the draft trade that they made with the Kings to get Davion Mitchell and the pick that became Jamal Shed and an extra second round pick, that Blazers pick, which is looking pretty good right now because the Blazers stink and are probably only going to get worse from here. Like, I think that is the sort of thing we're talking about here. Little incremental moves. The Ochai Agbaji thing's another one too, right? Just a small win that helps the sort of grander picture come together maybe a little bit quicker. That should, to me, be the goal here. And with what they're working with the guys they have available via the sort of expiring deals they have on the books, and the money they have and the flexibility they have under the first apron to go and make some stuff happen. I feel optimistic, hopeful they'll be able to turn something in the next couple of weeks into a small incremental win, which is really all we're looking for here. Not a terribly high bar to clear, but just hit a single, baby. A couple of singles. Wouldn't that be delightful? We'll come back on the other side, talk about Chris Boucher, who could be up for trade, or could they extend him? We'll get into that. The latest reporting from Jake Fischer, and of course our pal Matt Moore from over at Locked On Nuggets and Fansided, among other places. We'll get into that coming up in just 1 second. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate. They got a variety of bets to keep every single game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for that money. It's just going straight into your account. That is pretty sweet. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Of course, I'm a big proponent of the happiness hedge. If you're a fan of one of the teams playing on championship weekend in the NFL and you want to get some money if your team loses to help soothe the pain, you can go and do that and throw some money down. Say you're a Bills fan, bet on the Chiefs to win. So if the Bills lose and you're sad, at least you have some money coming in. And if it goes the other way and you lose your money, but your team wins, you're totally fine. Happiness hedge. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Back at it here on your, what the hell day is it? Tuesday episode of Locked On Raptors, breaking down some trade slop dropped by our pal Jake Fischer over at the Steinline newsletter on Substack. Shout out to our pals at You Know Ball. The I guess the progenitors of the term slop. They're the best. Let's get to it. Chris Boucher, belle of the deadline ball. Like, I don't know, man. This is kind of a surprise to me. Obviously, Chris Boucher has played some really good basketball of late. It's been super fun. I still kind of have a hard time believing that a team out there is looking at Chris Boucher as some kind of fix to whatever their ills might be, and like a viable piece to add to a rotation run, or to a rotation for a playoff run. It seems like a bit of a stretch to me. It seems as though you're looking at the very good parts of Chris Boucher and not a lot of the sort of ancillary stuff where it's like maybe not the most playoff proof brand of basketball, maybe not even the most like conducive to winning. Chris Boucher's done a lot of really good things on a lot of not very good Raptors teams, and that's part of the joy of him. This is why we love him. He brings light to the dark that is watching a losing basketball team. But I've always been a little skeptical that he would go and help some sort of contender make a real push. But maybe there's teams that are into it. I don't know. Like our pal Matt Moore, host of Locked On Nuggets and writes for Fansided now, among other places, did some reporting yesterday, named the Spurs and Nuggets as potential suitors for Chris Boucher. And of course, at this time of year, all kinds of rumors and stuff come out. And it's always being leaked for some reason or another. It's very possible that the Raptors are leaking stuff to say, hey, look, Chris Boucher, we might extend him. We should give us some trade stuff for him. Like, all this stuff has an agenda wherever it's coming from. Matt is plugged in with the Nuggets, obviously. Hard to say exactly what's going on here. But either way, you have the Denver Nuggets as a potential team for Chris Boucher. The Nuggets are a hard one to pull off a deal with because they're in the first apron, which means a couple of things. It means, first of all, that they cannot take back more money than they're sending out. That's kind of the big one with the first apron. It gets way more restrictive in the second apron, but you can't take back more money than you send out when you're in the first apron. There's also a first apron rule that will apply to Bruce Brown, who we're going to talk about coming up on the other side of the break, but that could sort of factor into any potential negotiations between the Raptors and Nuggets regarding Chris Boucher. And here's sort of my thinking on that. The Nuggets right now are just in need of like good rotation players, right? They need bench guys. They need guys to fill out the lineup. I know there's talk of maybe they'll go get Zach LaVine or something like that. Maybe that's also a pretty big deal to pull off midseason. And I don't know if the championship winning Nuggets are moving off of Michael Porter Jr. to go and get Zach LaVine in there. It just seems like maybe a little bridge too far for a Nuggets team that, by the way, is playing extremely good basketball again. And to me is no less than the second favorite to come out of the West, as long as they have Nikola Jokic. He's a monster. He's incredible. And the West kind of has some flaws that I think, top to bottom, certainly more good teams in the East, but there are a lot of really flawed teams in there as well. And Jokic is a guy who papers over a lot of flaws. And I just think if they can get themselves like a 7th, 8th, 9th man sort of rotation that isn't a bunch of guys you don't want on the basketball floor when things matter, maybe that just kind of gives them the recipe to go and win. I'm not saying I think Chris Boucher would necessarily be that kind of guy. Like I just said, I think it's pretty unlikely he goes and plays like winning, positive, impactful playoff minutes. That said, Nikola Jokic is a wizard who makes everybody better, so maybe there's something there. Either way, I think because it's difficult because there's just like a lot of weird salaries on this Nuggets team, and they don't have a ton of stuff to trade. They only have first round picks available. I think they only have one available to trade at the moment, considering the Stepien rule. They have 0 second round picks on their books, at least per looking at Fanspo, which has a pretty good track of all of the picks that are going in and out for all these teams. That's tough to work with because second round picks are like a pretty valuable currency around this time of year, especially when it comes to bench players. The Nuggets don't have any right now. And so that kind of limits what they can send back. They also have the Zeke Naji contract on their books, which is not a great deal. He's paid for 3 years beyond this one, and he makes like $9 million this year. I believe it's a descending contract, but still, that's like a decent amount of money for a guy who just doesn't seem like he's an NBA player that they paid, I think, expressly with the purpose to eventually trade. But taking that back for 3 years, maybe the Raptors can afford to. They're not winning anything right now, but, you'd hope by the end of 3 years, they're trying to win some stuff. And maybe Zeke Naji ends up becoming a burden on your books in 3 years' time that you're upset that you took on. Maybe it's kind of a low downside thing because it's not all that much money, but it's something to consider. Dario Saric also makes just over $5 million. He is under contract through next year as well. So you'd be taking on that money going into next season for another guy who just kind of looks like he's cooked at this point as far as like being a winning, helpful basketball player. But the way you might be able to convince the Nuggets to sort of give you something here, and this would very much speak to me as a guy who was a big fan of this dude in the draft last year, Deron Holmes II. He tore his Achilles in training camp this year and is missing the entire season. Torn Achilles are freaky. There's no doubt. Like those are injuries that can really hurt careers. Guys will come back from them, though, and Deron Holmes is 22 years old. So you would think if anyone's going to come back, it's someone that young. Fingers crossed. Either way, that to me is a sort of young player, sort of second draft buy low type thing the Raptors should be looking at. And if they can get themselves Deron Holmes, Zeke Naji, and Dario Saric for Chris Boucher, it might accomplish two things. One, it would help the Nuggets get under the first apron, which would help them with their Bruce Brown pursuit, which seems to be a thing that they want to do again. We'll get into that coming up. And two, like it would get them Chris Boucher, who I think will be a fine 8th man on that team. And the Raptors get Deron Holmes as sort of the nice return there, who, may or may not be anything. But I think as a guy who, for me, I really liked his sort of pliability between the 4 and 5 spots. I even thought there might have been some sort of wing upside there as like a defensive 4 who could track guys on the perimeter last season. And I think the 3-point shooting, the interior finishing was all stuff I really liked from him. He's a damn good college player. That's a worthwhile guy to take a look at for a team that needs front court help and needs shooting from the front court as well. And so, it's worth a look. Will the Nuggets be open to moving off from their recently taken first round pick? Hard to say, but in order to get off the money of Zeke Naji and Dario Saric, maybe that's worth it for them, especially because they have nothing else to really sweeten the pot with. Julian Strawther, I guess, but he seems pretty valuable to their rotation at the moment, even if he's very defensively prone to struggle and might not be a super playoff-proof player. I think he's someone they kind of buy into, and so it's tough. The Nuggets are a tough one. The other team Matt Moore threw out was the San Antonio Spurs, which, could you squeeze a couple second rounders out of them in order to take on Zach Collins' deal, which is a pretty big deal? It's like $16.7 million this year, $18 next year before he hits free agency. And he's not exactly good. I guess he would be their best backup center on this team. Not exactly any great shakes. Might not be as good as Kelly Olynyk even at this point. Probably not, honestly. And so, is it worth taking on that laborious a contract for a player who's not going to help you next year to get a couple second rounders? It might be. Again, the Raptors are kind of in a position where they're not really winning anything right now. And as much as I think they have the upside to make like a play-in type Detroit Pistons level jump next year to being halfway respectable, there's every possibility that doesn't happen if the draft doesn't go their way and guys don't develop at the rate that you're hoping to develop at. And so maybe it's a thing where there's not really any downside because Zach Collins is a big contract on a team that's not going anywhere anyway. If the team's not going anywhere by the end of next year, we got bigger problems on our hands. But like that could be sort of a potential match there. The Spurs are kind of light on interesting prospects. I mean, there's Malachi Branham. Did he do anything for you? Not really. It would complete the loop on the Thad Young trade, which would be hilarious, but I don't really see that being a thing. But, again, there could be some sort of modest return out there for Chris Boucher. You kind of capitalize on the run he's had. Where before the last month, I don't think he was really probably getting you anything. Maybe he lands you a couple seconds and you take on some bad money for a team and get some extra stuff for your trouble. That feels like the move here. If something's going to happen, Deron Holmes would be kind of fun. I'd be into that. Although the Zeke Naji thing gives me a little bit of pause. There's also the possibility, as Jake Fischer noted, that there could be a mutual interest in Chris Boucher sticking around in Toronto, which I don't know, man. Like, it makes me a little nervous because the Raptors do have a pretty healthy recent track record of overcommitting money and years, particularly years, to sort of deeper bench rotation Canadian big men. Chris Boucher, Ken Birch, Kelly Olynyk, and Jamal McGlure was on the coaching staff for many years. That's a joke. It's there's a number at which it makes sense. If you're not getting a big return back for Boucher, if you can't get Deron Holmes from the Nuggets, if you can't find a way to get a couple of seconds out of the Spurs or whatever, then it makes some sense to just kind of keep Boucher into the summer and see if you can work out something. But I think anything more than like $5 or $6 million a year just kind of feels like a misuse of resources and doesn't really get to the heart of the issue with this team, which is like they need more reliable NBA rotation players. And Chris Boucher is fun, but he's not reliable. He's not someone you can count on every single night to go do the thing, even though the nights where he does do the thing are incredible. It makes it all the more frustrating that he doesn't do it every single night. And so, like a minimum deal, $5-6 million, like sure, that's fine. That's not nuts. But if they're going to give Chris Boucher, say, his current salary or somewhere in that ballpark, that feels a little dubious for a guy who just turned 32 and on an ideal version of this team is like a super fun energy 11th or 12th man. I don't know, man. I don't quite buy the extension thing. That to me, that reads as, like I said earlier, hey, we're going to extend this guy. You better pony up, teams that want Chris Boucher. I don't know how much that'll work as a negotiating ploy in the public, and it could not what it is. Maybe I'm misreading that, but that's kind of my hunch when I look at that. It's tough. I like Chris Boucher a lot, and I feel like I'm slandering him every time I talk about keeping him around long term. But it just feels like a thing the Raptors, like this sort of like trend of them sort of overcommitting to guys who don't actually change the status or station of the team. It feels like it would be a continuation of that. Which, if you're someone who is hopeful that they've kind of learned from their misdeeds of the last few years and are moving forward and kind of getting back to their old ways of hitting little singles on moves and kind of doing well on the margins, that I think would run counter to your hope and belief that that's actually a change that's happened in sort of the psyche of the front office. So that's kind of my reading the Boucher thing. Maybe there's another team that comes out of the woodwork and is after him, and maybe the Raptors take on some money for next year to do it. That feels like the shape it's going to take. The sort of more laborious the contract they take on, maybe the more they can squeeze out of a team. But yeah, it's a tough one to read there with Chris Boucher. We'll come back to the other side. We're going to talk about Bruce Brown, who also was a part of Jake Fischer's reporting yesterday. And for me, I just can't get worked up one way or another at this point about the Bruce Brown return. I'll tell you why, and why you should also stop worrying coming up in just 1 second. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Basketball season's heating up, and there's no better way to get real money action while watching your favorite NBA stars than with Prize Picks. Whether you're a diehard fan or just love some friendly competition, Prize Picks makes it fun and easy to turn your basketball knowledge into cash. It's the way daily fantasy sports should be. It's simple, it's easy, and it's not you against 1,000 lineups that you haven't seen or some expert in a basement you can't beat. No, it's just you against your own ability to pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right. Think LeBron's going to drop 30 points. Think Luka's getting more than 8 assists. It's all there for you to go peruse those various projections for all the players in the NBA. You can go make your picks and predictions in less than 60 seconds and put your money where your mouth is. Again, the Raptors, they play a lot of games. They play routinely 3-4 nights a week, if you've heard. And hey, maybe you think Scotty Barnes is going to get more than his projected number of assists, or RJ Barrett's going to get more than his projected number of points. Not bad guesses. You can go and make those Raptors specific predictions and lineups, or you can avoid the Raptors entirely. That's the beauty of it. It's all in your hands. You get to pick the players you want to ride with each given night. Now's the perfect time to join. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. No need to win to get the bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Closing it out here, a little Trade Slop Tuesday edition of the show where we're talking Bruce Brown. Brucey. Jake Fischer had some stuff on him yesterday, and I think the big thing that kind of came out of it was that the Raptors could just buy out Bruce Brown if they can't find a trade for him before the deadline. And look, it seems like it's going to be pretty hard to find a trade for Bruce Brown before the deadline. He's not playing especially well, and moving $23 million in this salary cap environment, I can't express it enough. I don't know if people have really understood or grasped just how hard trades are going to be in season now because of the apron system and because of just the lack of money teams have to play with. On top of all the restrictions the aprons bring in, like, it's going to be difficult for salaries this big to move, especially if Bruce Brown's not a guy who's going to go be a no-brainer help to a winning team. That's really tough. It's just finding the money, finding the team that's going to be incentivized to do it. It's really difficult stuff. And there could be teams that really value Bruce Brown. It does seem as though the Denver Nuggets want Bruce Brown back. This in Jake's reporting, and it kind of stands to reason. He was really successful for them, and things have fallen on harder times there in Denver since he left. It would make some sense if they wanted to kind of bring him back and see if the Jokic-Brown tandem can produce all kinds of delicious fruit like it did back when Bruce was a Nugget during the championship season. It makes perfect sense to me. But the $23 million makes it really hard. Also, the fact that he could be a buyout guy, that doesn't really seem to have all that much impact because the teams that are really expensive, they're not going to be able to sign Bruce Brown if he's bought out. Basically, how it works with the first apron rules is if you're in the first apron, you cannot sign a player who's been bought out if the player's contract was more than the mid-level exception. Bruce Brown's contract is way more than the $13 million or whatever it is the mid-level exception sits at. And so teams in the first apron, like the Denver Nuggets, like the LA Lakers, like a few other teams that would in theory be teams that could land Bruce Brown, they're not going to be able to sign Bruce Brown if he's bought out to go and add to their teams unless they themselves get under the first apron. This is where that Chris Boucher trade idea comes in, where if they take back like $16 million in Zeke Naji, Dario Saric, and Deron Holmes and send out just 11 in Chris Boucher, I think it gets them very close, if not just under the first apron. And so they'd then in theory be able to go and sign Bruce Brown to a minimum deal. That maybe that's a way to kind of get more out of the Nuggets in a potential Boucher trade. Like that could be a thing where it's like, hey, we're not technically trading you Bruce Brown here, but we're trading and you're getting the ability to go sign Bruce Brown when we buy him out. It's sort of a wink thing, which I'm not sure you can do. That feels like tampering, but tampering happens all the time. Who the hell knows? Either way, maybe that incentivizes the Nuggets to give up a little more, whether it's like, I doubt they're giving up a first round pick, but you ask, right? Can you give us a first rounder and we'll give you a Boucher? We'll take back some bad money from you. And then you also sign Bruce Brown and you go off and running with Bruce and Boucher in your rotation. Like, it seems far-fetched, but I think the first apron is going to make teams do crazy things. And so it's worth a conversation. It's worth asking about. Do I think it's going to happen? Certainly not, because first-round picks are pretty valuable commodities right now, and the Nuggets certainly might have bigger fish to fry than those two guys. But you ask about it, especially if the Nuggets in particular are kind of telegraphing that they're a team that really values Bruce Brown, which it doesn't seem like many teams do right now. You got to take advantage. This is like when the Raptors kind of overvalue their own guys and kind of hurt their bargaining position. Maybe that's something here with the Nuggets where they're kind of overvaluing Bruce Brown, thinking of a past version of him, or really believing they can kind of make him into something. And maybe you take advantage of that in some way, shape, or form. It's really tough, though. It's like the trade stuff is going to be, I think, a lot less fun than people want because it's just really difficult to pull these trades off in season now. And ultimately, I cannot get upset about the return or lack thereof for Bruce Brown. I get it. They picked up his option in the summer. There was hope they were going to trade him then, and they didn't. And it was like, all right, well, we'll bring him into the season, and maybe we can find a deal for him. He, of course, has knee surgery. You can't account for that. He had the setback as he was returning and ramping up in the summertime, and he missed the big chunk of the season that he did. It's a bummer. It sucks, but injuries happen. That's life. That's always going to be a risk you run when you have any player on your team who you're hoping to trade. When it comes to the return for Bruce, I know there's still some folks out there who might be like, this is the way you kind of put a capper on the Pascal Siakam trade. You got to get something for Bruce to beef up the return for Pascal. That trade is done, cooked, washed at this point. Like, you can't go back and change it. And I think no matter what they get back for Bruce Brown, the story on that deal is not really going to be written until 2026 in the summer when we see where that pick from the Pacers comes in. And it's very possible we look back and say, why the hell did they do that instead of just keeping Pascal and maintaining flexibility to trade him another time down the line? That's a very real on the table possibility. Do I have a Google document ready to just laugh and point when it's proven the Raptors should have kept Pascal in a year and a half? Maybe. Preparing future podcasts here. I'm a professional, okay? But when it comes to Bruce, if you get a second round pick for him, 2 seconds, that's not tangibly improving the return for Pascal Siakam. It's not going back and retroactively fixing the terrible process that was undergone in the lead up to the Pascal Siakam trade. The Bruce return is a wash at this point. And then I know there's also the crowd that's like, well, they should have declined him in the summer and used that money to go do something else. And maybe they could have done that, right? They could have gone and tried to win the Caleb Martin sweepstakes. Though I'm certainly not upset to have not won the Caleb Martin sweepstakes if you've watched Caleb Martin play basketball for the Philadelphia 76ers this year. The other couple wings out there who were interesting, Najee Marshall and Derrick Jones Jr. Derrick Jones got basically the full mid-level exception from the Clippers. And I don't know, if you ask me, going to play for the Clippers at the new Intuit Dome, being probably, a guy who's going to play heavy minutes on a team that needs wing defense with Kawhi Leonard constantly up in the air as a health proposition, seems like the pitch for Derrick Jones Jr. would have been pretty good from the Clippers and was going to beat out a mid-level offer of the same value from the Toronto Raptors. Najee Marshall made a little less money to go to the Mavericks, but also he's joining literally the NBA finalists and not the team that was playing Malik Williams a bunch down the stretch. There was very clearly a better opportunity for winning and also making some money for a guy like Najee Marshall than there would have been in Toronto, where they would have had to probably overpay. And I don't know, man. I like Najee Marshall and all, but if you're the Raptors coming out of last season, throwing a bunch of money at a wing who's probably not changing your overall win outlook, maybe he makes your lineups make a little bit more sense. But Najee Marshall is a guy who makes a good team a little better. He's not a guy who takes a bad team and makes them good. And so it might have just been kind of a needless amount of money spent on a guy who's not exactly changing your station and is around for a while as a result. And maybe that's something you grow to regret. I have time if you're really upset they didn't go get Najee Marshall with the money they could have saved if they let Bruce Brown go, but I don't think it's that big a deal. This is such a small potatoes thing at this point. It just does not change at all the future outlook of the team. If the outlook is good in your eyes right now and they're well set up, what they get for Bruce Brown does not change that. If you think it's bad right now and they've screwed the pooch and they're screwed forever, what they get for Bruce Brown is not going to change that. This is not a thing that is going to alter the trajectory of the franchise very much. And worth noting, and this was also in Jake's piece yesterday, is that the Raptors, because they did not use the mid-level exception, which they would have had to do had they declined Bruce Brown and then signed a guy, they have essentially a trade exception that they can use to help with these sort of third-party trade facilitation situations. And so let's see what they do with it, right? Maybe they do nothing. Maybe they're not the third team that hops in and helps a bigger trade happen, which, hey, if that doesn't happen, whatever, fine. You move into the summer, you buy out Bruce Brown, or you let him walk in the summer, you get the salary relief that comes from that. There are worse things in the world. Or if you use the trade exception that's essentially there, the mid-level trade exception, and you turn Bruce Brown into X asset here or whatever, then, again, if we're talking about second round picks or a multiple second round picks here, we're not talking about anything all that world changing. And so there's still a way in which they can salvage this Bruce thing and turn it into something just by being that third team that hops in and using the salaries at their disposal to go make something happen. But if they don't, it does not change anything. It is so not a thing to be upset about. There are so many things to be upset about when it comes to the Toronto Raptors right now and the past many years and what lies ahead and all that stuff. You can find plenty of things to poke at what they get for Bruce Brown or do not get between now and the deadline is just not one of those things because it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme. And that is going to be where we leave this show. Thank you so much for hanging out. Thanks for rocking with us as always. Please follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. Go to the newsletter. You can go to the QR code on the screen or link in the description to go sign up and get it to your inbox every single day. Much appreciated when you go ahead and support the newsletter. You're all the very best. We'll be back again on Wednesday to talk about Raptors Magic, baby. Feel the rush. 2 thrilling basketball teams waging war in mid-January basketball, baby. Vivek Jacob will be along. We'll talk about that. And we'll, of course, guide you through the rest of your week with all sorts of fun stuff, as we always do here. Thank you so much for rocking with us. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Oh, man.